This is probably one of the most important topics that we'll talk about this year, and I really feel that if you get a handle on constructing objects and how object references work with objects that have been constructed, you will understand very easily a lot of the other things that we talk about. And the way to get a handle on that is to draw pictures. So I've already started drawing some pictures here, and I'm using the student example, that the student class that we've created in class and used in class. And the student constructor has two parameters, a string and I guess that's an integer. And when the constructor is invoked, it initializes the instance field's first name and the ID to whatever was passed in the construction statement. The GPA is another instance field. It hasn't been explicitly initialized in the constructor, and I probably should have 0.0 here if it's a double, because those if you have an instance field that is not initialized explicitly, it will default to 0. That's not true for local variables, but it is true for instance fields. So let's say now, oh, and I take one step back. The student A variable has been declared in the main method, and the student A variable contains a reference to this object that was just created. All an object reference is, it's basically just a memory location. So if you imagine that in this blue box, this is some memory location with some hexadecimal, memory location value. That hexadecimal value is what's actually stored with student A. So it's just the location of this particular object. So now, whatever student A happens to be pointing to, that object, we're going to invoke the setGPA method on it and change the GPA of that student to 3.5. So that's all good. Now, let's say, again, all of this is in the main method. I've just split out this construction statement from the declaration of the variable. So let's say I just declare the variable. So now in the main method, there is a student B variable that's created, but no object has been constructed yet. As soon as I use the new keyword, now this blue box is created, an object has been created, and in addition, the object reference has been assigned to this student B variable. So student B now has the memory location of this object that was just created. If I left off this student B here and I just said new student Jack2222, the blue box would still be created, but this arrow wouldn't be here. And if there was no reference stored, if there's no arrows going to the object, then it's just going to be garbage collected. So anything that, any objects that are created but don't have any references to them are just garbage collected, and they go away. If now I have the statement student B is equal to student A, now student B is going to refer to the same object that student A is referring to. So whatever memory location student A was storing, now student B is going to store that, and what ends up happening is that reference that student B had to this object over here, the Jack object down here, that goes away. So now this student has no references to it, and he will be garbage collected. Now, this is the part that everybody has difficulty with, because student B, if I set their GPA to 2.5, since student B is now pointing to this object up here, Jill's GPA is changed to 2.5. And most people, when they're looking at this, or most students when they're going through this code, they look at this and they say, oh, okay, Jack's GPA is 2.5, Jill's GPA is 3.5. But if you draw the picture out, you'll see that since since student B was set to the student A reference, both student A and student B are pointing to the same object, the same student object, which was Jill. So, an object reference describes the location of the memory location of the object, and you can have multiple object variables. Student A and student B are object variables. They can contain references to the same objects. So object variables store references or memory locations. If you have primitive data types or number variables, those are ints, doubles, floats, characters even, those actually store the values. They do not store memory locations, they actually store the variables, and we'll talk more about that later.